Welcome, dear viewers. For more thrilling and exclusive stories every week, become a member. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy your coffee. The needle went through my fingernail like butter. I was sitting in Dr. Hendrick's office in Fairbanks, watching him extract a blood sample from under what used to be my index nail. The infection had turned the whole thing black, and now thick, amber fluid was seeping out instead of blood. He didn't seem surprised. "When did you first notice the discoloration, Tommy?" he asked, not looking up from the syringe. 3 weeks ago, right after I got back from Resolute Bay. That's when he finally looked at me. Really looked. His eyes went from professional concern to something else entirely. "You were at the McKenzie station?" I nodded. The McKenzie Research Station was supposed to be a climate monitoring facility tucked away in the Canadian Arctic. At least, that's what my employment contract said. What it didn't mention was the security clearance, the background checks, or the fact that my supervisor carried a sidearm to check on weather instruments. Permafrost is good at keeping secrets. For decades, NASA leveraged that icy grip in a clandestine Arctic facility, safeguarding the unthinkable. Alien bodies, recovered and interred. They were history, a silent testament to life beyond Earth. But something's happening in that frozen tomb. The temperature logs are fluctuating, and the on-site biologists are sending back fragmented, panicked reports. Their licks are no longer static. They're evolving, and what they're evolving into is a nightmare humanity isn't ready for. But I didn't know any of that 3 weeks ago. All I knew was that I needed the money. My name is Tommy Brennan, and I'm a refrigeration technician from Anchorage. Been working on industrial cooling systems for 15 years, ever since I got out of the Navy. When the headhunter called about a short-term contract in the Arctic, good pay, all expenses covered, I figured it was just another fish processing plant or mining operation needing their freezers fixed. The flight to Resolute Bay was normal enough. Military transport, but that wasn't unusual for remote sites. What threw me off was the second flight. A smaller plane, no windows, with a pilot who wouldn't make eye contact. We flew for another 2 hours over nothing but white expanse before landing on what looked like a regular ice runway. Except there was no runway. We landed on the frozen ground itself, and as I climbed out, I realized the landing strip was actually the roof of something massive buried beneath the ice. That's when I met Derek Kowalski, the site supervisor. Polish guy, built like a brick shithouse, with hands that looked like they'd been dipped in frostbite. He handed me a clipboard with a single sheet of paper. "Read this. Sign it. Follow it exactly," he said. "Your life depends on it." I thought he was being dramatic. Turns out he wasn't being dramatic enough. The paper was heavier than it should have been. Not just thick, heavy like it was made from something other than wood pulp. The letterhead read, McKenzie Research Station, Environmental Protocol Compliance. Environmental protocol? I asked Derek, but he was already walking toward a metal hatch built into the ice. The first rule was simple enough. Report to Station Level 1 at 0800 hours daily for equipment assignments. Standard stuff. The second rule made me pause. Never operate alone in Sectors 7 through 12. Always maintain radio contact. Fair enough, remote facilities had safety protocols. The third rule made my stomach tighten. If you hear vocalizations that sound human but feel wrong, do not investigate. Return to Level 1 immediately. "What kind of vocalizations?" I called after Derek, but the wind swallowed my words. He was already cranking open the hatch, revealing a ladder that disappeared into artificial light below. "You coming or not?" Derek shouted back. "We lose heat fast with this thing open." I stuffed the paper into my jacket and climbed down. The ladder went deeper than expected, maybe 40 feet, before opening into a corridor that belonged in a hospital, not an Arctic research station. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the walls were that institutional beige that screams government budget. "How long has this place been here?" I asked. "Since the 80s, maybe earlier." Derek locked the hatch above us. "Officially, we monitor permafrost degradation and measure methane emissions. Unofficially." He gestured down the corridor. "Well, you'll figure it out." We passed several doors marked with numbers and letters: B4, B7, C2. Each had a small window, but they were covered from the inside with what looked like aluminum foil. Derek noticed me looking. Privacy thing. Scientists are weird about their work. What kind of scientists? The kind that don't like questions. The corridor ended at an elevator. As we descended, I felt my ears pop twice. We were going deep, deeper than any climate research required. When the doors opened, we stepped into what looked like a military command center. Banks of monitors showed feeds from security cameras, temperature readings, and data streams I couldn't interpret. A guy in his 50s, wearing a parka over a lab coat, looked up from one of the terminals. Derek introduced him as Dr. Mitchell Varga, the facility director. Varga had the dead-eyed stare of someone who'd seen too much and slept too little. "You're the cooling specialist," Varga said. It wasn't a question. "Good. We've got temperature regulation issues in the deep storage areas. Equipment keeps failing." "What are you storing that needs such precise temperature control?" Varga and Derek exchanged a look. "Biological samples," Varga said finally. "Very old biological samples. If they thaw, we lose decades of research." He led me to another elevator, this one requiring a keycard. As we descended further, the air grew colder despite the heating systems. Level 3, Level 4, Level 5. Finally, we stopped at Level 6. "This is as far as you go for now," Varga said. "Your job is maintaining the refrigeration units on this level. Don't worry about what's below." The door opened onto a hallway lined with industrial freezer units, each the size of a small room. Through the thick glass windows, I could see shelving inside, but the interiors were fogged with condensation. Temperature gauges showed readings between -40 degrees Fahrenheit and -60 degrees Fahrenheit. "Unit 7 is giving us problems," Derek said, pointing to a freezer at the far end. "Temp's been fluctuating. Sometimes spikes up to -20 degrees Fahrenheit before the backup systems kick in." I knelt beside the unit's control panel and popped it open. The wiring looked normal, but one of the temperature sensors was corroded, not from age, but from something that had eaten through the metal coating. "When did this start?" "2 weeks ago, right around the time we had the incident." "What incident?" Varga cleared his throat. "We had a researcher violate protocol, went into the restricted areas alone, found him 3 hours later, unconscious in one of the lower levels. When he woke up, he couldn't remember what happened down there." "Is he all right?" "He quit the next day, packed his stuff, and took the first transport out. I turned back to the corroded sensor. Whatever had caused this damage was still active. I could see fresh corrosion around the edges. "I'll need to replace this entire sensor array," I said, "and probably check the others too. If this is some kind of chemical reaction, it could spread." Derek nodded. "Do what you need to do, just remember the rules." As they walked away, I heard Varga say something to Derek in a voice barely above a whisper. "How much longer before we can't contain them?" Derek's response was lost in the hum of the refrigeration units, but the tone was clear. Not long enough. I spent the next 4 hours replacing sensors, and every single one showed the same corrosion pattern. Whatever was eating through the metal wasn't random. It was deliberate, targeting the temperature monitoring equipment specifically. By the time I finished, my hands were numb despite the insulated gloves. That's when I noticed the sound. It started as a low vibration in the floor, barely perceptible through my boots. Then it became audible, a rhythmic pulsing, like a heartbeat amplified through the building's superstructure. The refrigeration units were running normally, so it wasn't mechanical. I pressed my ear to the floor. The sound was coming from below, level 7. I checked my watch. 16:47 hours. Derek had said to report back to level 1 before 1700, but I had 13 minutes, enough time to take a quick look around. The elevator required Varga's keycard, but I'd noticed a maintenance stairwell at the end of the corridor. The door was marked "Authorized personnel only," but it wasn't locked. My curiosity got the better of me. The stairwell was concrete and steel, built to last centuries. Emergency lighting cast everything in sickly yellow tones. I descended 2 flights before reaching a door marked Level 7, Biological Storage. The handle turned easily. Level 7 was different from the floors above. The corridor was wider, with higher ceilings, and the air carried a metallic taste that made my saliva feel thick. More importantly, it was warmer. Not warm, but noticeably less cold than Level 6. The pulsing sound was stronger here, coming from deeper in the facility. I walked past several doors, each with small observation windows. Most were covered from the inside, but one wasn't. I peered through and immediately wished I hadn't. The room contained what looked like examination tables, stainless steel surfaces with restraint straps and drainage channels. But it was the stains that made my stomach lurch. Dark brown patches covered the tables and pooled on the floor, forming patterns that looked almost deliberate. "You're not supposed to be here." I spun around. A man in his 30s stood behind me, wearing the same lab coat and parka combination as Varga. His name tag read, Dr. J. Noak, Biosecurity. He had the pallor of someone who hadn't seen sunlight in months. I know what you were doing." Noak stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of something chemical on his breath. Curiosity. It's natural. But down here, curiosity kills more than cats. "What is this place?" Noak glanced around nervously, then pulled a folded paper from his pocket. It was identical to the one Derek had given me, but with different rules. "Read these, memorize them, your life depends on it." The first rule was familiar. Never operate alone in sectors 7 through 12, but the rest were new. If you hear metallic scraping sounds from behind sealed doors, do not investigate. Report to Dr. Varga immediately. If you observe condensation patterns that move against airflow, evacuate the area and seal all access points. Under no circumstances should you attempt to view the contents of storage units 12A through 12G without proper authorization and sedation protocols. If any biological material appears to be moving or shifting position, initiate Emergency Protocol 7 and retreat to Level 1. Sedation protocols? I looked up at Noak. What the hell are you people studying down here? Before he could answer, the pulsing sound intensified. Now it was accompanied by something else, a scraping noise, like metal against concrete, coming from deeper in the facility. Noak's face went pale. Shit, they're active again. Who's active? He grabbed my arm and started pulling me toward the stairwell. We need to get to Level 1. Now. As we hurried down the corridor, I caught glimpses through other observation windows. Most were still covered, but in one, the aluminum foil had been torn from the inside. Through the gap, I saw movement, something large shifting position in the darkness. Noak, what the fuck is down there? You don't have clearance for that information. I think I have clearance to know if I'm in danger. We reached the stairwell and Noak paused at the door. The scraping sound was getting louder, and now it seemed to be coming from multiple directions. "All right," he said, his voice tight with fear. "But you didn't hear this from me. This facility isn't just for climate research. We're part of a larger project, a recovery and containment operation that's been running since the 1980s. Recovery of what? The scraping sound stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Biological specimens, Noak whispered. Specimens that shouldn't exist. They were found in a crash site in northern Canada, preserved in permafrost for God knows how long. The government brought them here for study. Crash site, like a plane crash? Noak shook his head. Not a plane. The lights in the corridor behind us flickered once, then went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. And in that crimson glow, I saw something that made my rational mind rebel against what my eyes were reporting. One of the doors at the far end of the corridor was opening. Not being opened, opening by itself, the heavy steel swinging outward with deliberate slowness. And from the darkness beyond, something was emerging. It moved wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. Like it was learning how to navigate in 3 dimensions, testing the limitations of space and gravity. The shape was roughly humanoid but elongated, as if someone had taken a person and stretched them like taffy. Emergency Protocol 7, Noak breathed. Oh God. Emergency Protocol 7. He yanked open the stairwell door and shoved me through. We took the stairs 3 at a time, and I could hear him speaking rapidly into a radio as we climbed. This is Noak on level 7. We have a containment breach in Sector 12. I repeat, containment breach in Sector 12. Implementing Emergency Protocol 7. The response was immediate and panicked. Copy that, Dr. Noak. All personnel evacuate to level 1. Lockdown initiated. As we reached level 6, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. The refrigeration units were shutting down automatically, their constant hum replaced by the wail of emergency sirens. What happens during Emergency Protocol 7? I shouted over the noise. We flood the lower levels with liquid nitrogen, Noak replied. Drop the temperature to negative 200 degrees Fahrenheit in 30 minutes. It usually puts them back into dormancy. Usually? He didn't answer. We continued climbing toward level 1, and I realized that whatever those things were down there, they were the reason for all the rules, all the secrecy, all the fear I'd been sensing since I arrived. And they were waking up. When we finally reached level 1, Derek was waiting with Dr. Varga and 2 other men I didn't recognize. They wore military fatigues but no identifying patches or insignia. Varga looked at me with resignation. I suppose there's no point in maintaining the cover story now. The 2 military guys introduced themselves as Agent Burke and Agent Shaw from something called Departmental Special Projects. They had the kind of faces that disappeared in crowds, forgettable features trained for invisibility. Burke did the talking while Shaw just stared at me like I was a problem that needed solving. Mr. Brennan, Burke said, you've just witnessed classified material related to national security. We need to discuss your options. Options? I looked around the room. Derek wouldn't meet my eyes, and Noak was sitting in a corner, hands shaking as he lit a cigarette. What kind of options? Varga stepped forward. The kind where you sign additional paperwork and accept a significant pay increase, or the kind where you never leave this facility. The threat was clear enough. I nodded toward the monitors showing the lower levels. So what exactly am I looking at down there? Burke checked his watch. The nitrogen flood will be complete in 18 minutes. Once the specimens are back in dormancy, Dr. Varga will brief you on Project Lazarus. Lazarus? Like rising from the dead? Something like that? We waited in tense silence while the facility's automated systems did their work. On the monitors, I watched as clouds of supercooled nitrogen billowed through the corridors of level 7. The temperature readings dropped rapidly, minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 75 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit, continuing to plummet. At minus 150 degrees Fahrenheit, the scraping sounds stopped. At minus 180 degrees Fahrenheit, Varga declared the lockdown over. All right, he said, settling into a chair across from me. Time for the real story. In 1979, a Soviet radar station in northern Siberia detected an unidentified object entering Earth's atmosphere. The object crashed in the Canadian Arctic, approximately 200 kilometers from where we're sitting now. I felt my mouth go dry. You're talking about a UFO. I'm talking about a spacecraft of non-terrestrial origin, Varga corrected. The Soviets couldn't reach the crash site, but we could. A joint NASA-DoD recovery team was dispatched within 72 hours. He pulled up a file on one of the computers, grainy photographs of something metallic, partially buried in ice and snow. The craft looked organic somehow, like it had grown rather than been built. The ship was empty when we found it, but there were traces, biological material that had been preserved in the permafrost for an unknown period. We brought everything back here for study. How long unknown? I asked. Carbon dating was inconclusive. The material seemed to resist standard dating methods, but geological analysis of the crash site suggested the impact occurred sometime between 10 and 50,000 years ago. Burke leaned forward. The specimens we recovered showed no signs of decay, despite their age, preserved perfectly by the Arctic conditions. We thought they were dead. But they're not dead. No, Varga said quietly. "They're not dead, they're dormant. And recently they've been showing signs of increased activity." Noak stubbed out his cigarette and looked up. "The temperature fluctuations started 6 months ago. Small at first, just a degree or two. But then we began observing changes in the specimens themselves." "What kind of changes?" "Cellular regeneration, tissue growth, and behavioral responses to external stimuli." Varga brought up another file, this one showing what looked like medical scans. "The specimens appear to be adapting to their environment, learning from it. The scans showed something that made my skin crawl. The shapes were vaguely humanoid, but wrong in every detail. Elongated limbs, additional joint structures, and what appeared to be redundant organ systems. But the worst part was the brain activity. Even in dormancy, the neural scans showed patterns of consciousness." "They're aware," I said, "increasingly so, which brings us to the current crisis." Varga switched to a real-time feed from level 7. The corridors were now coated with frost from the nitrogen flood, but I could see movement behind some of the observation windows. The containment systems we've relied on for 4 decades are becoming less effective. Derek finally spoke up. "Temperature control used to keep them completely inactive for months at a time. Now they're active again within days of a lockdown." "And they're getting stronger," Noak added. "The first containment breach was 18 months ago. Lasted maybe 30 seconds before we could re-establish dormancy. Today's breach lasted almost 10 minutes. Shaw, who had been silent until now, pulled out a tablet and showed me a series of incident reports. "We've had 17 containment breaches in the past year, each one longer than the last, each one involving more specimens." "How many specimens are we talking about?" 12 primary specimens, Varga said, plus several smaller fragments, pieces that seem to have broken off during the recovery process. I studied the incident reports Shaw was showing me. The dates formed a pattern. Breaches were occurring more frequently, and the duration was increasing exponentially. If the trend continued, they'd have a permanent breach within weeks. "What happens if you can't contain them anymore?" The room went quiet. Finally, Burke answered, "We have contingency protocols." "What kind of contingency protocols?" "The kind that involve a lot of explosives and a very large hole in the ground." I felt my stomach drop. "You'd destroy the facility." "If necessary, but we'd prefer to find another solution." Varga leaned back in his chair. "Which is where you come in, Mr. Brennan. We need someone who understands cooling systems to help us design a more effective containment method. The current refrigeration technology is 40 years old. We need an upgrade. And if I refuse..." Shaw spoke for the first time since the introductions. Refusal isn't an option at this point. The implication was clear. I'd seen too much to walk away. "All right," I said, "but I want to see everything, all the specs, all the data, all the specimen information. I can't design a better system if I don't understand what I'm trying to contain." Varga nodded. "Agreed, but there are additional protocols you'll need to follow." He handed me another sheet of rules, longer than the previous ones. "Never enter storage units 12A through 12G without a minimum of 2 security escorts and active video monitoring. If specimens show signs of coordinated movement or apparent communication, evacuate immediately and implement Emergency Protocol 9. All tools and equipment used in the storage areas must be sanitized with ultraviolet radiation before removal. If you experience unusual sensations such as static electricity, tinnitus, or sudden temperature changes in your extremities, report to medical immediately. Under no circumstances should you attempt physical contact with any specimen or specimen fragments. If you observe specimens attempting to manipulate their environment or containment systems, do not engage, document, and retreat." "What's Emergency Protocol 9? I asked. "Complete facility evacuation followed by thermal sterilization," Burke said. "We heat the entire underground complex to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 6 hours. That would kill anyone still inside." "Yes, it would." I read through the rules again, focusing on the one about unusual sensations. "Has anyone experienced these symptoms before?" Noak and Varga exchanged looks. "The researcher who quit last month," Noak said. He reported persistent ringing in his ears and numbness in his hands. Medical couldn't find anything wrong with him. Where is he now? We don't know. He left the country immediately after termination. I folded the rules and put them in my pocket. When do I start the real work? Tomorrow, Varga said. But first, you need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Tonight, you'll observe the specimens directly. Derek stood up. I'll show you to your quarters first. You'll want to rest before the observation session. As we left the command center, I caught a glimpse of one of the monitors showing level 7. The frost from the nitrogen flood was already starting to sublimate, and I could swear I saw condensation forming on one of the observation windows. Condensation that seemed to move in patterns too regular to be natural. My quarters turned out to be a small room with military-style furniture and no windows. Derek left me with a dinner tray and instructions to be ready at 0200 hours for the observation session. As I ate, I kept thinking about the rules, especially the one about coordinated movement and apparent communication. The way Varga had emphasized apparent suggested they weren't sure if what they were seeing was actual communication or just coincidence. But if these things were truly intelligent, if they were learning and adapting, then the real question wasn't how to contain them better. The real question was, what did they want? And judging by the increasing frequency of the breaches, I was pretty sure we were about to find out. Derek woke me at 1300 hours, handing me a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been brewed in a carburetor. Observation time, he said. Dr. Varga wants you to see what we're working with before you start designing new containment. I dressed quickly and followed him through corridors I hadn't seen before. These were older sections of the facility, with concrete walls that wept condensation and fluorescent lights that flickered intermittently. The air felt heavier here, thick with humidity despite the sub-zero temperatures outside. How often do you do these observation sessions? I asked. Weekly, minimum, sometimes daily if the specimens are particularly active. Derek stopped at a security checkpoint where Shaw was waiting with another man I didn't recognize. A tall guy with prematurely grey hair and nervous energy. This is Dr. Yates, Shaw said. He's our behavioral specialist. Yates nodded but didn't extend his hand. Mr. Brennan, I understand you'll be working on our cooling systems. That's the plan. Good. We need all the help we can get. Yates handed me a device that looked like a cross between a dosimeter and a cell phone. Wear this. It monitors electromagnetic activity and body temperature. If either reading goes above the yellow line, we evacuate immediately. The device was already beeping softly, showing baseline readings in the green zone. What would cause the readings to spike? Specimen activity affects local electromagnetic fields, Yates explained as we walked. We're not sure why. As for body temperature, some people experience hypothermia when in close proximity to active specimens. Hypothermia, I thought these things were frozen. They are, but their presence seems to trigger unusual physiological responses in humans. Elevated heart rate, increased body temperature, sensory distortions. We reached another elevator, this one requiring keycards from both Shaw and Yates. As we descended, Yates continued his briefing. You'll be observing from a safe distance through reinforced glass. Do not attempt to communicate with the specimens. Do not make sudden movements. Do not touch the observation windows. Have people tried to communicate with them? Shaw and Yates exchanged a look. Some researchers have reported feeling compelled to approach the specimens, Shaw said. This is why we now require multiple observers and strict time limits. The elevator stopped at level 8. I hadn't even known there was a level 8. How deep does this place go? I asked. Deep enough, Shaw replied. Level 8 was different from the upper floors. The walls were lined with some kind of metallic material that seemed to absorb sound, and the lighting was dimmer, more focused. Instead of the institutional beige of the other levels, everything here was matte black or dark grey. Psychological reasons, Yates explained when he noticed me looking around. Bright colours and reflective surfaces seemed to agitate the specimens. We walked past several observation rooms before stopping at one marked Primary Specimen Chamber 12C. Through a small window in the door, I could see an observation deck with scientific equipment and multiple viewing stations. "Before we go in," Yates said, "I need to explain what you're going to see. The specimen in 12C is what we call a primary, one of the larger, more intact specimens recovered from the crash site. It's approximately 7 feet in length and shows the highest levels of neural activity." Shaw added, "This particular specimen has been responsible for 60% of our containment breaches. It seems to be the most aware." They led me into the observation deck. The room was larger than I'd expected, with multiple viewing windows looking down into what appeared to be a surgical amphitheatre. Banks of monitors showed various readings: temperature, electromagnetic activity, infrared imaging, and something labelled neural pattern analysis. "There," Yates pointed to the largest window. I approached slowly and looked down into the chamber below. The specimen lay on what looked like a modified operating table, though the restraints were obviously newer additions. The body was humanoid in basic structure, but wrong in every detail that mattered. The limbs were too long, the joints bent in directions that defied anatomy, and the skin had a translucent quality that revealed branching networks of vessels underneath. But it was the head that made my hands start shaking. The skull was elongated, almost dolphin-like, but with features that suggested intelligence far beyond any terrestrial life. The eyes, if they were eyes, were larger than human eyes and seemed to track movement even though the monitors showed the specimen was in dormancy. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. "Neural activity never completely stops," Yates said quietly. "Even at minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit, we still detect patterns that suggest consciousness." The device Yates had given me started beeping faster. The electromagnetic reading was climbing toward the yellow zone. "That's normal," Shaw said. "Proximity to active specimens affects the local EM field. As long as it stays below the red line, we're fine." I studied the readouts on the various monitors. The temperature in the specimen chamber was holding steady at negative 58 degrees Fahrenheit, but I noticed fluctuations in other readings. The neural pattern analysis showed waves of activity that pulsed in regular intervals, like it was dreaming. "What does it dream about?" I asked. "We don't know," Yates replied, "but the patterns are becoming more complex over time, more organized." As if responding to our conversation, the specimen's elongated fingers twitched. Just a small movement, barely perceptible, but it made everyone in the observation room tense up. "Should we be concerned?" I asked. "No, minor motor responses are normal during dormancy," Yates said, but his voice carried an edge of uncertainty. The specimen's fingers twitched again, and this time the movement was clearly deliberate. The creature was flexing its digits in sequence: thumb, index, middle, ring, pinky, then reversing the pattern. "That's not normal," Shaw said. Yates was already reaching for a red phone mounted on the wall. "Control, this is Observation Deck 8. We're seeing coordinated motor activity in Specimen 12C. The response crackled through speakers. "Copy that. Temperature holding steady at negative 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Neural activity within acceptable parameters." But as we watched, the specimen's movements became more purposeful. It was flexing its hands in patterns that looked almost like sign language, and its head turned slightly toward the observation windows. The electromagnetic reading on my device suddenly spiked into the red zone. "Everyone out," Shaw ordered. "Now." As we hurried toward the door, I made the mistake of looking back. The specimen had turned its head completely toward our observation window, and those massive eyes seemed to be looking directly at me. Not just looking, studying. And in that moment, I felt something I can only describe as contact. Not physical contact, but mental contact, like fingers probing the edges of my consciousness, testing for weaknesses. The device in my hand was screaming now, the electromagnetic reading off the charts. My body temperature had spiked to 102 degrees Fahrenheit, and my hands were tingling with static electricity. "Move!" Yates shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me through the door. As soon as we were in the corridor, the readings dropped back to normal, but the sensation of being probed, of being examined by something vast and alien, lingered. "What the hell just happened?" I asked. Shaw was already on his radio, calling for an emergency lockdown of level 8. "The specimens are developing new capabilities," he said. "Capabilities we don't understand." That felt like telepathy. "Impossible," Yates said quickly. "Electromagnetic interference can cause sensory distortions, hallucinations. There's no such thing as telepathy." But his words carried no conviction. We all knew what I'd experienced down there wasn't a hallucination. As alarms began blaring throughout the facility, I realized the truth about our situation. We weren't just dealing with alien specimens that were waking up. We were dealing with intelligent beings that were learning to communicate, learning to influence their environment, and they were getting stronger every day. "How long do we have?" I asked Shaw as we rode the elevator back to level 1. He checked his watch and ran some calculations in his head. "Based on current escalation patterns, maybe 2 weeks before we lose containment completely. And then we find out what they really want." The elevator doors opened and we stepped into chaos. Technicians were running between monitoring stations, Dr. Varga was shouting orders into multiple phones, and every screen in the command center was flashing red warning indicators. Burke appeared at my shoulder. "Mr. Brennan, I hope you understand the urgency of our situation now." I nodded, still feeling the phantom touch of alien consciousness at the edges of my mind. "I understand, but I'm going to need complete access to the facility and all specimen data. If these things are as intelligent as they seem, standard containment won't work much longer." "Whatever you need," Burke said, "just give us a solution before it's too late." Looking at the chaos around us, I had the sinking feeling that it might already be too late. The next morning, Varga handed me a file thick enough to choke a horse. "Everything we know about the specimen's thermal requirements," he said. 43 years of data. I spread the documents across a conference table on level 2, a room I hadn't seen before that looked like it belonged in a corporate office rather than an Arctic research facility. Coffee cups and energy drink cans accumulated around me as I dove into decades of research notes, engineering schematics, and incident reports. The pattern was clear within the first hour. The specimen's tolerance for higher temperatures had been increasing steadily since 2019. What used to require -80 degrees Fahrenheit to maintain dormancy now barely held at -60 degrees Fahrenheit, and the rate of adaptation was accelerating. "Dr. Varga," I called across the room where he was working at his own pile of paperwork. "According to this data, in 1984, you could keep them dormant at -40 degrees Fahrenheit. What changed?" He looked up from his laptop. "We're not sure. Climate change was our first theory. Gradual warming of the permafrost might be affecting their physiology, but the correlation doesn't match." I flipped through more reports. What about this note from 1997? Specimen 12C showed signs of conscious adaptation to containment protocols. What does that mean? Varga set down his coffee and joined me at the table. That was Dr. Morrison's observation. He believed the specimens were deliberately adapting, learning to resist our containment methods. "Where's Dr. Morrison now?" "Dead. Suicide in 2003, left a note saying he couldn't sleep because of the dreams." The room suddenly felt colder. Dreams? "He claimed the specimens were communicating with him telepathically, showing him things, visions of other places." Varga pulled up a file on his laptop and turned the screen toward me. His final report makes for disturbing reading. Morrison's last report was dated 3 days before his death. The language was increasingly erratic, describing contact protocols and mental interfaces that sounded more like science fiction than scientific observation. But one passage made my stomach clench. "The subjects are not specimens. They are ambassadors. They have been waiting for us to develop sufficient cognitive capacity to receive their communications. The containment isn't for our protection. It's to prevent premature contact, but they're growing impatient." "Jesus," I muttered. "Did anyone take this seriously?" Not at the time. Morrison had been showing signs of mental instability for months. We assumed it was cabin fever, isolation psychosis. Varga closed the laptop. "But now you're not so sure." 3 more researchers have reported unusual dreams since Morrison's death. Always the same themes: vast spaces, impossible architectures, and a sense of being watched by something ancient and patient. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about my experience the night before. The probing sensation, the feeling of contact. Has anyone considered that maybe Morrison was right? About what? Telepathic aliens? About them being ambassadors? What if they're not just adapting to our containment? What if they're trying to establish communication? Varga laughed, but it was a nervous sound. You've been here 3 days, Tommy. Don't let this place get into your head. But it was already too late for that advice. I'd felt something down there in the observation chamber, something that felt more like communication than hallucination. And if Morrison was right, if these things were trying to make contact, then maybe our approach was fundamentally wrong. I want to see all the specimens, I said, not just 12C, all of them. That's against protocol. Direct observation is limited to 1 specimen per session. Protocol isn't working anymore. If I'm going to design a better containment system, I need to understand what we're really dealing with. Varga considered this for a long moment. I'll need approval from Burke and Shaw. Then get it. While Varga made his calls, I continued reading through the files. Buried deep in the technical specifications, I found something interesting. Energy consumption data for the containment systems. The power requirements had been increasing steadily over the decades, but not in a linear pattern. There were spikes, sudden jumps in energy consumption that corresponded to the containment breaches. Varga, I called out as he finished his phone conversation. Look at this power consumption data. Every time you have a breach, energy usage spikes for the entire facility. He studied the graphs I was showing him. We always assumed that was due to the emergency cooling systems kicking in. But look at the timeline. The spikes happen before the breaches, not after. It's like the specimens are drawing power from somewhere. That's impossible. They're biological entities, not electrical devices. Are you sure about that? I pointed to another section of Morrison's notes. He mentions electromagnetic signatures around active specimens. What if they're somehow interfacing with our electrical systems? Before Varga could respond, the lights in the conference room flickered. Not the random flicker of old wiring, but a deliberate pattern. 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short. Was that Morse code? I asked. Varga had gone pale. SOS. The lights flickered again, this time in a different pattern. Then the heating system cycled on and off in the same rhythm. Within moments, every electrical system in the room was pulsing in synchronized patterns. They're in the facility's electrical grid, I said. The patterns stopped abruptly and normal lighting resumed. But now I could hear something else, a low humming that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The same pulsing rhythm I'd heard on my first day, but stronger now, more coordinated. Varga was already on his radio. Control, this is Dr. Varga on level 2. We need immediate system diagnostics on the electrical grid. The response was immediate. Sir, we're showing anomalous power fluctuations throughout the facility. Levels 6 through 8 are drawing twice normal power consumption. Are the containment systems holding? Temperature readings are stable, but we're detecting unusual electromagnetic activity in all specimen chambers. I felt the tingling sensation starting in my fingertips again, the same static electricity I'd experienced during the observation session. They're awake, I said. All of them. That's impossible. The temperature readings... The temperature doesn't matter anymore. They've adapted beyond our understanding. The humming in the walls intensified, and now I could distinguish different frequencies, different rhythms. It sounded almost like conversation, multiple voices discussing something in a language made of electrical pulses and harmonic vibrations. We need to evacuate the facility, I said. Absolutely not. We have protocols for this. Your protocols are based on the assumption that these things are just biological specimens. But what if they're not? What if they're some kind of bioelectrical hybrid technology? Varga stared at me. You're starting to sound like Morrison. Maybe Morrison wasn't crazy. Maybe he was the only one who understood what we're really dealing with. The humming stopped suddenly, and the silence that followed was deafening. Then, From somewhere deep in the facility came a sound I'll never forget. A mechanical groaning, like metal under stress, followed by what sounded unmistakably like laughter. Not human laughter, something else entirely. "What the hell was that?" Varga whispered. Before I could answer, Shaw burst into the conference room. "We have a problem. Multiple containment breaches on level 8, and this time the emergency cooling isn't working." "Define not working," Varga said. "The specimens are generating their own heat. Internal temperature readings are climbing despite maximum cooling output." I felt my stomach drop. "They're overriding the containment systems." "Worse than that," Shaw continued. "They're communicating with each other. We're detecting synchronized neural activity across all 12 specimens. Whatever they're planning it together." The lights flickered again, but this time the pattern was different, more complex, almost musical. And as the electrical systems throughout the facility pulsed in harmony, I realized we were listening to a conversation between beings whose intelligence dwarfed our own. "How long until complete containment failure?" I asked. Shaw checked his tablet. "At current rate of temperature increase, maybe 6 hours." "And emergency protocol 9? "Burke's already authorized it. Thermal sterilization begins at 1800 hours whether we're out or not." I looked at my watch. 12:47 hours. Less than 5.5 hours to figure out what these things wanted and either stop them or escape. "There's something else," Shaw said. "Dr. Noak hasn't reported in for his shift. We found his quarters empty and his keycard missing." "Where would he go?" "Unknown, but his last logged access was level 8, specimen chamber 12G. The implications hit me immediately. He went to see them alone. "It appears so." I thought about Morrison's notes, about the dreams and the sense of contact. What if he didn't go down there voluntarily? What if they called him? Varga and Shaw exchanged looks. "Called him how?" "The same way they're controlling the electrical systems. The same way they influenced Morrison. These things aren't just adapting to our technology, they're learning to manipulate it. And us." As if to confirm my suspicions, the facility's PA system crackled to life. Through the static came a voice. Noak's voice, but wrong somehow, like someone else was using his vocal cords. "The integration is beginning," the voice said. "Resistance is unnecessary. We offer alliance, not conquest." "Jesus Christ," Shaw breathed. "They're using Noak as a mouthpiece." "Not using," I corrected. "Merging. They're showing us what integration means." The voice continued. "Tommy Brennan, your understanding of thermal dynamics interests us. Join Dr. Noak on level 8. There is much to discuss." They knew my name. They knew my specialty and they wanted to talk. "Don't even think about it," Varga said. But I was already thinking about it. If these beings were truly intelligent, if they were offering communication rather than conquest, maybe there was another option besides thermal sterilization. "What if we're approaching this all wrong?" I said. "What if instead of trying to contain them, we try to understand what they want?" "Absolutely not. You're talking about surrendering to hostile alien entities." "I'm talking about communication. Morrison thought they were ambassadors. What if he was right?" The lights flickered again, and this time the pattern spelled out a message in perfect Morse code. "Choice yours, integration or incineration. Choose wisely." We had less than 5 hours to decide the fate of humanity's first contact with alien intelligence, and whatever choice we made, I had the sinking feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. Burke arrived within minutes, his face grim and his sidearm visible beneath his jacket. "Nobody goes to level 8, he announced. "Facility evacuation begins in 2 hours. Anyone not topside by 1600 hours gets left behind." "That gives us 3 hours before sterilization," I said. "Time enough to try communication." "Communication with what? Things that just hijacked one of our people?" Shaw was monitoring multiple data streams on his tablet. "Electromagnetic activity is off the charts. They're drawing power from the main grid now, not just the local systems." "What are they doing with all that power?" Varga asked. I had a theory, but it scared the hell out of me. "They're preparing for something. The question is what?" The PA system crackled again and Noak's voice returned, but this time it sounded more natural, more like him. "Tommy, please, you need to see this. They're not what we thought they were." "It's a trap," Burke said flatly. "Maybe. Or maybe it's the only chance we have to understand what we're dealing with." I stood up from the conference table. "Look, in 3 hours this place becomes a crater. If there's even a small chance these things are trying to communicate rather than invade, don't we owe it to humanity to find out?" "The risk is too great," Shaw said. "The risk of not trying is greater." I headed toward the door. "If they wanted to kill us, they've had 43 years to figure out how. The fact that we're still alive suggests they want something else." Burke stepped into my path. "I can't let you go down there." "You can't stop me either, not unless you plan to shoot an unarmed civilian." The moment stretched taut between us, then Varga spoke up. "Let him go." Burke spun around. "Doctor." Morrison was right about one thing. These entities are beyond our current understanding. If there's a chance to learn something before we destroy everything, we should take it. "Under no circumstances," Burke began, but Varga cut him off. "My facility, my decision. Tommy goes to level 8, but with full monitoring and a hard deadline. If he's not back in 90 minutes, we proceed with evacuation regardless." Burke's jaw worked silently for a moment. Finally, he nodded. 90 minutes. And you wear full monitoring equipment." 20 minutes later, I was stepping into the elevator with more electronic devices strapped to my body than a NASA test pilot. Heart monitor, EM detector, infrared camera, audio recorder, and a GPS tracker that Burke insisted would work even through the facility's shielding. "Last chance to reconsider," Shaw said as the elevator doors began to close. "If I don't come back, tell my sister I tried to do the right thing." The descent to level 8 felt longer than before. As I passed each floor, the electromagnetic readings on my equipment climbed steadily higher. By the time I reached level 8, every device was registering activity at the edge of their measurement ranges. The corridors were different. The emergency lighting had been replaced by a soft, blue-white glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The air was warmer, not hot, but noticeably above the sub-zero temperatures I'd grown accustomed to. "Control, this is Tommy. I'm on level 8. Temperature is approximately 40 degrees Fahrenheit and rising." Shaw's voice crackled through my earpiece. "Copy that. Proceed with extreme caution." I walked past the observation chambers I'd seen the night before, but now the doors were standing open. Inside each room, the containment tables were empty. Whatever restraints had held the specimens were now scattered across the floors like discarded jewelry. "Control, the containment chambers are empty. Repeat. All specimens have breached containment." "Tommy, get out of there now." But before I could respond, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Dr. Noak approaching from one of the side corridors. He looked normal, tired but normal. No obvious signs of alien influence or possession. "Tommy," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Thank God you came. I wasn't sure they could convince you." "Jack, what the hell happened to you?" "They showed me things. Things about why they're here, what they want." He gestured toward the open doors. "It's not what we thought. Not at all." "Then explain it to me." Noak led me deeper into level 8, past corridors I hadn't seen before. The crash in 1979 wasn't an accident. They came here deliberately, but they weren't ready for contact. They needed time to understand us, to learn our languages and our ways of thinking. So they pretended to be dead for 40 years. Not pretended, they were dormant but still conscious, dreaming. And in their dreams, they were studying us, through our radio signals, our television broadcasts, our digital communications, learning what it means to be human. We stopped at a large chamber I hadn't seen during my previous visit. Through reinforced windows, I could see all 12 specimens standing in what appeared to be a circle. But they weren't restrained, and they weren't motionless. They were moving, slowly, deliberately, in patterns that reminded me of a dance or ritual. "Jesus," I breathed. "They're preparing for integration," Noak said. "Not invasion, integration. They want to share knowledge, to combine their technology with ours." "And what happens to us in this integration?" Noak paused, and for the first time since I'd seen him, uncertainty flickered across his face. That's complicated. The specimens in the chamber had stopped their movement and were now facing the observation window, looking directly at us. As I watched, one of them, the same one I'd observed the night before, approached the glass. Up close, its features were even more alien than I'd realized. The elongated skull housed a brain easily twice the size of a human's, and those massive eyes held an intelligence that was both ancient and utterly foreign. But there was something else in that gaze, something that might have been curiosity or even compassion. "It wants to communicate with you directly," Noak said. "How?" "Touch the glass." Every rational part of my mind screamed against it. But looking into those alien eyes, I felt the same sense of contact I'd experienced the night before. This time, though, it wasn't probing or invasive. It felt like an invitation. I reached out and placed my palm against the reinforced glass. The contact was immediate and overwhelming. Images flooded my consciousness, not my own memories, but someone else's. I saw vast ships traveling between stars, civilizations rising and falling across millennia, and knowledge beyond human comprehension. But I also saw loneliness, isolation, and a desperate hunger for connection. These beings weren't conquerors, they were refugees. Their homeworld was dying, consumed by their own technology and environmental collapse. They had sent out dozens of ships, each carrying small groups of survivors, searching for worlds where they might find sanctuary. Earth was just one stop on a journey that had lasted thousands of years. But they had learned from their mistakes. They wouldn't repeat the pattern that had destroyed their own world. Instead, they wanted to share their knowledge to help us avoid the same fate. The integration they offered wasn't absorption or conquest, it was partnership, but it came at a cost. "The integration changes us," Noak's voice seemed to come from far away. "Our DNA, our neural structure, we become something new, part human, part them. We retain our consciousness, our memories, but we gain their longevity, their knowledge, their abilities." I pulled my hand away from the glass and the visions faded, but the understanding remained. These beings were offering humanity a choice: evolve or face the same extinction that had claimed their own species. "What about those who refuse?" I asked. Noak's expression darkened. "They can't force the integration, but they also can't allow the knowledge of their existence to spread. Too many humans would see them as a threat, would try to destroy them. So the choice is integration or death. For those who know about them, yes." I felt my stomach sink. That's why Morrison killed himself. He understood the choice and couldn't live with either option. Morrison was offered integration first, but he was too afraid, too attached to his human identity. So he chose the third option. The third option, suicide rather than transformation or elimination. I looked back at the specimens, no, the refugees in the chamber beyond. They were still watching me, waiting for my decision. And I realized that everything that had happened over the past 4 decades had been leading to this moment. They had been patient, learning about us, preparing for contact. But the increasing containment breaches weren't accidents or adaptations. They were tests, evaluating our readiness for the choice they would eventually offer. "How long do I have to decide?" I asked. "The integration process takes approximately 6 hours. If it's going to happen, it needs to begin now, before the thermal sterilization." 6 hours, just past the deadline Burke had set for facility destruction. "And if I refuse?" Noak looked genuinely sad. "Then you leave with the others, and this place becomes a crater. They'll survive the sterilization. Their technology is far more advanced than ours, but humanity will lose its chance for partnership." I thought about my sister back in Anchorage, about the life I'd built, about everything I'd be giving up. Then I thought about the visions I'd seen, worlds destroyed by their own progress, civilizations that had chosen isolation over cooperation. "There's a fourth option," I said. "What's that?" "I stay, undergo integration, but serve as a bridge between their kind and ours. Someone who can communicate with both species and help guide future contact." Noak nodded slowly. That's what I chose, but it means never going home again, never being fully human again. I looked at my watch. 73 minutes since I'd entered level 8, 17 minutes before Burke's deadline. In 17 minutes, I would have to make a choice that would define the future of human civilization. And I was pretty sure I already knew what that choice would be. "Control, this is Tommy, I'm staying." Shaw's voice exploded through my earpiece. "Negative. You have 15 minutes to reach the surface." "I'm making contact. The specimens, they're not what we thought. They're refugees and they're offering partnership." "Tommy, get out of there now. That's an order." I reached up and switched off the radio. Some decisions couldn't be made with other people shouting in your ear. Noak was watching me with an expression that mixed relief and sadness. "You're sure about this?" "No, but I'm sure about what happens if I don't try." I looked back at the specimens in the chamber. "How does it work?" "Direct neural interface. They'll guide you through the process." He led me to a door I hadn't noticed before, one that opened directly into the chamber where the 12 beings waited. As we entered, I felt the temperature rise another 10 degrees. The air hummed with energy that made my skin tingle. The specimens arranged themselves around us in a perfect circle. Up close, they were even more imposing, each standing nearly 8 feet tall, their elongated limbs moving with fluid grace. But there was nothing threatening in their posture. If anything, they seemed almost reverent. The one I'd made contact with earlier stepped forward and extended one of its hands toward me. The fingers were longer than human fingers, ending in what looked like microscopic filaments rather than fingernails. "The neural interface is through direct contact," Noak explained. "It won't hurt, but the information transfer is intense." I reached out and took the alien's hand. The contact was nothing like touching the glass. This time the flow of information was bidirectional. I could feel my own memories and thoughts being examined even as alien knowledge flooded into my mind. I saw their history in vivid detail, a civilization that had mastered faster than light travel, genetic manipulation, and consciousness transfer between biological and artificial substrates. But with that mastery had come stagnation, then decay. Their sun was dying, their homeworld was exhausted, and their population had dwindled to a few thousand survivors scattered across a dozen ships. They had been traveling for over 2 millennia, seeking worlds where they could establish new colonies. But every inhabited planet they encountered presented the same dilemma: how to make contact without triggering a violent response from the native species. Earth was different. Humans showed the capacity for both destruction and cooperation, often within the same individual. The specimens had spent 40 years studying us, trying to determine if we were ready for the knowledge they could share. But there was something else in the information flow, something that made my newly enhanced consciousness recoil in horror. They weren't the first refugees to reach Earth. The visions showed me other crash sites, other recovery operations, stretching back centuries. The Roswell incident, the Tunguska event, unexplained disappearances in remote locations around the globe. Dozens of ships, hundreds of survivors, all following the same pattern: dormancy, study, attempted contact. And then I saw what had happened to the previous contact attempts. Integration wasn't partnership, it was replacement. The process didn't create a hybrid of human and alien consciousness. It created an alien consciousness using human biological components as raw material. The original personality, the original soul, was consumed in the process. Noak wasn't Noak anymore. He was one of them, wearing Noak's face and using Noak's memories to manipulate me into compliance. I tried to pull my hand away, but the neural interface had become physical. Filaments from the alien's fingertips had penetrated my skin and were spreading through my nervous system like digital ivy. "The integration has begun," the thing wearing Noak's face said. "Resistance will only cause discomfort." But I wasn't interested in comfort anymore. I was interested in survival. The knowledge flowing into my mind included technical specifications for their biotechnology, including the neural interface system. And buried within those specs was something they probably hadn't intended to share. The interface was bidirectional and vulnerable to feedback loops. If I could overload the connection with enough chaotic neural activity, I might be able to disrupt the integration process. I thought about every traumatic memory I'd ever suppressed, every nightmare that had woken me in a cold sweat, every moment of pure terror I'd experienced in my 34 years of life. Then, I amplified them, fed them into the neural link with all the emotional intensity I could muster. The effect was immediate. The alien's massive eyes widened, and its grip on my hand loosened. The other specimens in the circle began making sounds I'd never heard before, high-pitched keening noises that might have been alarm or pain. But the feedback loop worked both ways. As I flooded the connection with human trauma, alien memories began bleeding back into my consciousness, and what I saw there made my own nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. These beings had done this before, not just on Earth, but on dozens of worlds across the galaxy. They called themselves shepherds, guiding younger species toward evolutionary advancement. But what they actually did was harvest consciousness from entire civilizations, absorbing knowledge and experience while leaving empty biological shells behind. The crash in 1979 hadn't been an accident or a refugee ship. It had been an advanced scout mission sent to evaluate Earth's readiness for harvesting, and I had just volunteered to be the first crop. The neural connection was fluctuating wildly now, sparks of bioelectrical energy arcing between my hand and the alien's filaments. The other specimens were backing away, their keening cries becoming more urgent. Through the chaos, I could hear alarms blaring throughout the facility. My radio crackled back to life, Shaw's voice cutting through the static. "Tommy! Energy readings are off the charts. What's happening down there?" I managed to activate my microphone with my free hand. "They're not refugees," I shouted over the alien wailing. "They're harvesters. The integration is a lie." "Say again. You're breaking up." "Don't let anyone else make contact. They consume consciousness. They're not trying to save us. They're trying to replace us." The feedback loop reached critical intensity, and the neural connection finally severed. I stumbled backward, my hand smoking from the bioelectrical burns. The alien I'd been connected to collapsed, its elongated form convulsing on the chamber floor. But the damage was done. Not to them, to me. The partial integration had left me with fragments of their knowledge, pieces of alien consciousness embedded in my human brain like digital shrapnel. I could feel my thoughts becoming foreign to myself, my memories rearranging to accommodate new neural pathways. "The integration cannot be reversed," Noak said, but his voice was different now, layered with harmonics that hurt to hear. "You will become one of us within hours, regardless of your resistance." I looked at my hands and saw that my fingernails were already changing, darkening and elongating into the same filamentous structures I'd seen on the aliens. The transformation was happening at the cellular level, rewriting my DNA in real time. "How long?" I asked. 3 hours, perhaps 4 if you fight the process." I checked my watch. 1,558 hours. Burke's evacuation deadline was in 2 minutes, and thermal sterilization would begin at 1800. Even if I could reach the surface, I wouldn't be human by the time I got there. And if the integration completed, I would become another agent of their harvesting operation, helping them identify and manipulate future targets. There was only one option left. I pulled out the emergency beacon Burke had given me, a device designed to trigger immediate thermal sterilization if containment was completely lost. The red button was covered by a clear plastic cap that required deliberate effort to remove. "If I trigger this, does the sterilization kill you?" The specimens were helping their fallen member to its feet, but they were watching me with obvious concern. Noak answered for them. "The thermal process will destroy these physical forms, but our consciousness exists in quantum substrates that survive temperatures up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So you'll just find new bodies?" "Eventually, but it will delay our mission by decades, perhaps centuries." I thought about Morrison, about the choice that had driven him to suicide, about the other researchers who had reported dreams and voices, slowly being prepared for harvesting, about humanity's future if these creatures succeeded in their mission. "Tommy," Shaw's voice crackled through my radio. 2 minutes to evacuation. Are you coming or not?" I looked at the beacon in my hand, then at the transforming fingernails that would soon spread throughout my entire body. Sure, listen carefully. Tell Burke to proceed with thermal sterilization immediately. Don't wait for 1800 hours. What? Tommy, you have time to get out. No, I don't. And neither does anyone else if these things escape. I pulled off the plastic cap and held my finger over the red button. Tommy, no. Tell my sister I tried to do the right thing. I pressed the button. The response was immediate. Blast doors slammed shut throughout the facility, sealing off every level. Emergency lighting switched to red, and a computerized voice began counting down from 10 minutes. 10 minutes until the facility became a furnace hot enough to melt steel. The specimens were becoming agitated now, moving with increased urgency toward the chamber exits. But the blast doors had sealed us in. Whatever quantum substrates their consciousness resided in, they weren't leaving this room. You have doomed your species, Noak said, his voice now completely alien. Others will come. Others will complete the harvest. Maybe, but not today. I sat down on the chamber floor and watched my fingernails continue their transformation. In 10 minutes, the integration would be irrelevant. In 10 minutes, everything would be over. But humanity would survive a little longer, and sometimes, that's the best you can do. Dr. Hendricks set down the syringe and studied the amber fluid he'd extracted from under my fingernail. In the laboratory light, it seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. Interesting cellular structure, he murmured, adjusting his microscope. I've never seen anything quite like this. I watched him work, knowing he wouldn't find any conventional explanation for what he was seeing. How could he? The partial integration had left me with biological components that didn't exist in any textbook. Tommy, I need you to tell me exactly what happened at this McKenzie research station. I'd been dreading this question for weeks. The official story was simple enough. Industrial accident, facility destroyed, all personnel evacuated safely. But Dr. Hendricks wasn't buying it, especially not with my fingernails continuing to transform despite the facility's destruction. There was a fire, I lied. Chemical storage area. I got exposed to some kind of experimental refrigerant. Refrigerant doesn't cause cellular mutation. He pulled up the test results on his computer screen. The analysis showed DNA sequences that belonged to no terrestrial organism, protein chains that defied known biochemistry, and neural tissue that appeared to be attempting communication with some distant signal source. Dr. Hendricks, if I told you the truth, you wouldn't believe me. Try me. I looked at my hands. The transformation had continued even after the thermal sterilization, though slowly. My fingernails were now completely alien, and the changes were spreading up my fingers toward my wrists. I had maybe a month before the integration reached my brain. The station wasn't studying climate change, it was housing specimens of non-terrestrial origin, and those specimens weren't dead. Hendricks looked up from his microscope. Extraterrestrial specimens? Consciousness harvesters. They consume the minds of entire civilizations, wearing their bodies like masks while searching for new worlds to feed on. Tommy, that sounds like science fiction, I know, but take another look at that sample. He adjusted the microscope again, this time increasing the magnification. What he saw made him step back from the eyepiece. The cellular structure is organized like it's building something. It's trying to complete the integration process. Even though the primary specimens were destroyed, the biological components they implanted in me are still active. Integration into what? Into one of them, I've got maybe 4 weeks before I stop being me and start being something else. Hendricks pulled up my medical records on his computer. Your emergency contact lists a sister in Anchorage, Margaret Brennan. Have you told her about this? God, no. What would I say? That I'm turning into an alien consciousness harvester? That I'm going to need to be put down like a rabid dog before I become a threat to everyone around me? There might be treatment options, surgical removal, chemotherapy, radiation. The changes are happening at the genetic level. Surgery can't fix rewritten DNA. He was quiet for a long moment, studying the test results. The facility destruction. That wasn't an accident, was it? No, it was thermal sterilization designed to eliminate the specimens before they could complete their mission. And you were inside when it happened. I triggered it, Stayed behind to make sure the job got done. Hendricks leaned back in his chair, processing what I'd told him. Tommy, if what you're saying is true, then you saved human civilization. For now, but they'll send others eventually. The specimens I encountered weren't the first to reach Earth, and they won't be the last. Then why are you here? Why not disappear somewhere remote until the integration completes? I'd been asking myself the same question. The answer was complicated, tied up in guilt and responsibility, and the alien knowledge rattling around in my skull. Because I need someone to know the truth, someone who can recognize the signs if this happens again. I gestured toward the test results. Document everything. The cellular mutations, the DNA sequences, the behavioral changes. If more harvesters arrive, humanity needs to know what to look for. And then what? What do we do with that knowledge? I stood up and pulled on my jacket, being careful not to let the transformed fingernails show. You burn everything down before it spreads, no matter the cost. Outside, snow was beginning to fall over Fairbanks. In 4 weeks, I'd be something else entirely, part of an intelligence that saw humanity as nothing more than raw material for consumption. But for now, I was still Tommy Brennan, still human enough to make sure someone knew what was coming, still human enough to plan my own execution when the time came. The permafrost might be good at keeping secrets, but some secrets are too dangerous to stay buried forever.